Hi, my name is Ava Cronenberg, and welcome to the Captain's Log. Today we'll be talking about marine mammals and the modern-day circus. Circuses were the craze in the 19th century. The idea that humans were performing next to animals, doing tricks and flips, was astonishing for the time. This idea of taming the wild was a fascination. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, there was this sense that circuses were unethical and wrong, and there was a shift. However, the modern-day circus of SeaWorld thrives on the exploitation of marine mammals. When I was little, I did go to the SeaWorld Orca show in San Diego, California, and I remember watching the orcas perform, and I was just in awe as a little girl watching this all happen. Now that I'm older and I'm a little bit more educated on the ongoings with marine mammals, I'm sickened. I can't believe that at one point in my life, I was in one of those stands clapping and cheering for what was going on within the tank. Watching the documentary Blackfish was really eye-opening, along with doing extensive research on the topic. I'm appalled by the treatment that marine mammals receive in captivity. For my Marine Mammal Final, I will be giving a synopsis on marine mammals in captivity. For the most part today, we will be talking about SeaWorld and the corruptions within it that has led to the mistreatment of marine mammals, along with ways that the law has either fallen short or ways we could change it to better the treatment, along with ways that we could change rehabilitation and captivity of marine mammals. I think it's really important before we get into the meat of this episode to talk about what laws and regulations that places like SeaWorld or aquariums or zoos have to follow to hold marine mammals. A great place to start with this is the only Marine Mammal Protection Act that was passed in 1972. This act was passed because there was an increasing concern among scientists and the public that significant declines in some species of marine mammals were caused by human activities. Fun fact, this is actually the first legislation to mandate an ecosystem-based approach to marine resource management. There are 3 federal entities that are responsible for implementing MMPAs, or Marine Mammal Protection Act: NOAA Fisheries, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Marine Mammal Commission. This act includes whales, dolphins, porpoises, seals, sea lions, walrus, polar bears, sea otters, manatees, and dugongs. The list that I just provided is just a really diverse group of marine mammals. Some of these mammals will spend their whole entire life in the ocean, while some of it will only spend parts of their life in the ocean. It's also really important to note that marine mammals are vital to their environment. They can act as indicator species that can tell you the health of the ocean. The MMPA prohibits the taking, air quotes on that, of marine mammals, including harassment, hunting, capturing, collecting, or killing in U.S. waters and by U.S. citizens on the high seas. The act also makes it illegal to import marine mammals and marine mammal products into the United States without a permit. The Animal Welfare Act, or the AWA, is also an important piece of legislation that we need to pay attention to. AWA is often enforced by Animal and Plant Inspection Service, and they are responsible for regulating marine mammals at public display facilities, i.e. aquariums and zoos. Title IV was subsequently amended in the 2000s to include John H. Prescott Marine Mammal Rescue Assistant Grant Program, which provides grants or cooperation agreements to eligible standing network participants for recovery and treatment or rehabilitation of stranded marine mammals, data collection of living or dead stranded marine mammals, or facility upgrades, operation cost, and staff needs that are directly related to the recovery and treatment of stranded marine mammals and the collection of data from living or dead stranded marine mammals. Zoos and aquariums have to follow the Animal Welfare Act, along with getting licenses and registrations from the USDA. The Animal Welfare Act does have specific regulations for marine mammals in captivity, and I'm going to read you this list, and I need you to pay very close attention to the requirements. I want you to later on in this episode compare to what is going on in SeaWorld to the requirements that they are supposed to be meeting and upholding when housing marine mammals in their facility. There has to be a minimum horizontal dimensions, depth, volume, and surface area of the pool that needs to be met. Water quality has to be up to standard. They have to be within appropriate social groupings, exceptions being for medical or training purposes, and to make sure that the appropriate species are grouped together. There must be experienced staff and veterinary care. The Marine Mammal Protection Act does not apply to zoos and aquariums because they're not in their natural habitat, so meaning It's not a wild animal in the wild, it's a captive animal in captivity. But they do have to be compliant with conservation and welfare. The Marine Mammal Protection Act gives NOAA and Fishery and Wildlife Service jurisdiction over the care and maintenance of marine mammals in captivity. One more thing I want to touch on before we get to the core of this is just the biology and the natural history of orcas. So that way we can compare how they live in the wild compared to how they live in captivity. Orcas are these incredible organisms. They are so developed and so incredible. It's mind-blowing, actually. Orcas in the wild can live up to be 100 years old. And adult orcas do not leave their mother's side. So they cultivate in these pods, and these pods are highly communicative, and they have their own language, which is not recognized by the scientific community, but the way each pod talks and communicates with each other is so different. No pod is the same in that way. It's like they have their own culture. They spend their life swimming through open ocean, hunting together in these pods, and it's very matriarchal dynamic, so they follow the grandma or the oldest woman in the pod. And something that I find so incredibly beautiful about this species is how emotionally and just in overall just intelligent they are. An MRI showed that they have an extra part in their brain that's connected to their emotional center, so it's big. And it leads us to believe that there's a possibility of a higher social and emotional intelligence within these creatures. They also have more gray matter than us in their brain. We can see that there's a sense of self and a sense of group within orcas. And we can see this when they hunt. I mean, they're so incredibly brilliant that they can work together to flip over a sheet of ice to get a seal. These pods are formed in matriarchal dynamics, so they follow the oldest female in the pod, and she is who has birthed all of them, and they have all stayed together in this community. And what's crazy to think is that orcas have been this developed for a very long time, longer than the First Nation. The people of the First Nation actually called them Blackfish, and they believe that they had this great spiritual power and that they shouldn't be messed with. Now, moving forward, we're going to start talking about some of the incidents and just like the overall history of SeaWorld, and within it, I just want to tell you that there's no recorded orca attack within the wild. And I want you to carry that with you into this next part. So the way that we got orcas in captivity, it was not some rescue or they were stranded. It was a live capture with the intent to keep them in captivity and use them for financial gain. These live captures were often really traumatic for the pods. Humans would come in on boats with bombs and nets and helicopters, and they would corral the young and cut them off with nets. And as these calves are separated from the family wouldn't leave. And they would often cry and follow the boat as they dragged their young away. The men who were responsible for capturing these orcas, you have to realize they had this different mindset. No one has ever captured an orca before. It was this sense of conquering the wild, again, as I was going back to with the concept of circus, the taming the wild. And achieving this feat for them, it gave them so much money. The money on the table was insane. In the documentary Blackfish, they interview one of the men that are responsible for helping catch Tilikum. It's a pretty well-known orca. We'll probably talk about him later in the episode. But the man who caught Tilikum said that he felt like it was the equivalent of kidnapping a child from its mother. He also would go on to say that most of the young that they captured died within the nets, and only a few of them would make it out. And with those dead calves, they were told that they needed to cut them open, fill them with rocks, and sink them so there was no evidence. This wasn't something that just happened once. It happened multiple times, to the point where in 1976, SeaWorld was banned from capturing whales off the coast of Washington. Immediately after that, they started live capturing orcas in Iceland. Sealand, which was this, I'm going to put, again, air quotes over aquarium in Victoria, British Columbia. Let's be real. It was a net hanging in the water on a dock with barriers around it and metal tanks that they housed the orcas in at night. Tilikum, the orca we was talking about prior, was captured when he was 3 and has been in captivity since. So when Tilikum was brought to Sealand, he was 3, and he was put in a pen with these 2 female orcas, okay? And what they did to train these orcas is they kept them hungry. They didn't feed them normally like they should have. They had to perform tricks and do their training, and if they didn't do it, and if Tilikum didn't do what he was supposed to, they would starve all the orcas. So the orcas that Tilikum was in with, the two other females, they became incredibly frustrated with Tilikum, and they would rake him, which is basically taking your teeth, the orcas taking their teeth and rubbing it across their skin. At night, they were held in a 20 by 30 foot metal tank with no lights for most of their life there. Again, in the documentary Blackfish, the comparison of orcas in these tanks to inmates in prison was brought up continuously, that how inmates in prison, when they are not fed, they're not socialized, because we are social creatures like orcas, how it makes them crazy, it makes them aggressive, highly agitative, and we see this come out on February 20th of 1991. Kelty Bryn dies at Sealand. She slipped and fell into the tank when she was trying to clean up, and on her way out, one of the whales grabbed her and dragged her back in. The public was told that she just drowned and that it was not an attack. However, witnesses state that it was in fact a whale that attacked her and caused her death, but it was also Tilikum, the big black male with the flopped over fin. Soon after that, Sealand closed and Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld. So going back to what I was saying about some requirements that need to be met in order to house marine mammals. The trainers at SeaWorld that were handling these marine mammals, more specifically the orcas, had no experience with orcas. Most of them did not have experience with these mammals. Most of them thought that they had to have a degree in marine biology or this intense, deep knowledge of this animal. It turns out they didn't. Most of them were hired based off of how well they could swim and their personality. There was one trainer who was hired when she was 18. They had these young, inexperienced trainers standing on whales' backs, swimming with them, and even being thrown by them. In 1992, Tilikum arrives in Orlando at SeaWorld, and he weighs about 12,000 pounds. He's a big boy. And they isolate him due to him, again, being put into a different group, a different pod of females, and them bullying him and raking him. And Tilikum was taken on by SeaWorld to be used for breeding. As a matter of fact, 54% of SeaWorld's orcas have Tilikum's genes. SeaWorld knew that Tilikum was somewhat responsible for what happened at Sealand, and they kept him in the back. And he was only taken out to do this big final performance where the crowd oohs and ahs, oh my gosh, look how big that killer whale is. And SeaWorld lied to their new trainers about what happened at Sealand. They just said it was the other female's fault and Tilikum had nothing to do with it. Even though Tilikum has had behaviors where he has lunged at trainers. There was one time it was caught on film and SeaWorld made them burn the tape. And SeaWorld was no better for Tilikum than Sealand. It, again, was just this concrete cage instead of a floating one. And they'd swim laps. They couldn't swim miles like they usually do. I think they would have to do 34 laps around to at least somewhat meet the equivalent of what a orca in the wild would swim. Going back to SeaWorld breeding program, they had their first baby in captivity, and SeaWorld was not necessarily thrilled by the calves because the calves would disrupt the show. And when when one of them was 4 years old, she was moved to another park, which is basically an equivalent of a toddler being separated from their mother, flown across the country, and thrown in with a random group of people that don't speak the same language as you. When the mother was separated from her calf, she cried. She stayed in the corner all night, shaking and screaming. There was another incident where a mother was separated from her calf, and the mom, again, was in the corner, and she sent out these long-range, never-heard-before vocals, which was an attempt to find her calf. Orcas are so highly connected to their pods, to their families. It is so against their nature to be separated from that young of an age, and it does so much to the family and the structure. To these orcas, it's like losing a family, it's losing a loved one, and they know it because they're so incredibly intelligent. And the incidents with Tilikum was not the first. There was actually, for the trainers, little did they know at the time that they were there were 70 plus trainer accidents that SeaWorld did not inform them about. There is files out there with recorded incidents between orca on trainer. It is all hidden and not reported. In 1987, a killer whale was killed by another killer whale out of frustration in a pen. In 1987, a man was hurt getting crushed between two whales during a show. They called it a training error and they blamed the trainer, and they told none of the trainers about it. Daniel P. Dukes is a man that snuck into Orlando SeaWorld and decided drunkenly that he was going to swim with the orcas, like like the trainers do. And in the morning, they found him draped over the back of Tilikum, naked with his genitals bitten off. The public was told that he died of drowning and hypothermia, and that's what SeaWorld stuck with. And unfortunately, we all know about February 24th, 2010, Don Branchew dying in the tank with Tilikum. Not only have the living conditions for these orcas pushed them to extremes and unnatural behaviors, but it's starting to go into putting the people and the trainers at risk. These people have been at risk for over 40 years, and we're just now doing something about it. NOAA and OSHA are now both involved with the problems in SeaWorld. Not only that, but SeaWorld has started to spread misinformation about orcas. SeaWorld have representatives that are in the crowds with patrons, giving them fun facts. Some being as such as, killer whales can live up to 25 to 35 years in the wild. They live longer here because they have all the provided care they needed. Floppy dorsal fins are normal. About 25% of orcas have them, when in reality, it's less than 1%. Our whales are in their pods. They're with their family. What that is in the accumulation of the pods is an artificial collection picked by the management, not by biological needs. There are different animals from different cultural subsets with different genes and languages, and it's causing hyperaggression. And we're seeing this come out on other orcas, on trainers, and unfortunately, the one pedestrian incident. These marine mammals are having severe health problems that they would not have in the wild. There's incorrect depiction of conservation, and it's deceiving the public. Having a starved orca do tricks in front of substrate and fake mountains, that's not what conservation is. The way they attained the orcas goes against that. Putting the orcas on a platform and making them do these things and have people clap and celebrate and smile, it brings the wrong idea of what our relationship to orcas should. Orcas should be in the wild, with their pods, not doing flips, but living. Orcas living in captivity has taken a toll on them. And it's not just orcas, it's other marine mammals. The Exotic Incident Report Database is a database comprised of zoos and aquariums incident reports open to the public. Here are just a few incident reports from the past 10 years. Not entirely all at SeaWorld, but most are. On January 18th, 2016, in Orlando, Florida, a 33-year-old dolphin named Betsy died at SeaWorld's Aquatica water park in Orlando. SeaWorld had relocated Betsy from San Diego theme park the previous week. On January 5th, 2016, in San Antonio, Texas, a 12-year-old Pacific white-sided dolphin named Dart died at SeaWorld San Antonio. He was the 5th marine mammal to die in SeaWorld in 7 months. On April 9th, 2016, at San Antonio's Dine with Shamu show, 2 young killer whale siblings started fighting after they were separated from their mother in the performance. When one of the siblings resurfaced, their chin was dripping with blood. On June 9th, 2016, in San Diego, California, a pilot whale named Bubbles died at SeaWorld San Diego. Bubbles, who was captured in the wild at a young age, spent over 2 decades in Maryland, California, before being moved to SeaWorld in 1987. On July 11, 2016, in San Antonio, Texas, a beluga calf born at SeaWorld San Antonio died at 3 weeks of age. This was the 5th infant the mother, Martha, had lost it in captivity. On July 16, 2016, in Fresno, California, the Fresno Chafe Zoo 8-year-old California sea lion died Saturday after catching valley fever, a fungal ailment that is uncommon in marine mammals. On December 12, 2016, in Rochester, New York, Sunny, a 6-month-old sea lion pup, died unexpectedly of undetermined causes. She was found at the bottom of her pool. This is the 3rd sea lion death at the zoo in 4 months. And on January 6, 2017, in Orlando, Florida, Tilikum, the orca predominantly featured in the 2013 documentary Blackfish, died at the age 36. He had spent over 33 years in captivity and had been at SeaWorld for more than 25 years. Veterinaries had been treating him for a persistent and complicated bacterial lung infection. A major thing that has resulted out of SeaWorld's actions has also been the lawsuits. Currently ongoing is the NOAA versus SeaWorld lawsuit, which goes over violations of the Marine Mammal Protection Act and permit violations. There was also a lawsuit against the Animal Welfare Institute versus NOAA, and it was regarding the failing to enforce permit regulations requiring SeaWorld to submit a necropsy and veterinary records from the deceased orcas at SeaWorld. About 188 orcas have died in captivity, and at least 44 of those have been at SeaWorld. Overall, what's been going on at SeaWorld goes against the natural history of these species. Wild whales and dolphins travel 10 to 100 miles a day, achieving speeds of 30 miles per hour, and they can dive hundreds of feet. Even in the largest facilities, they have less than 0.0001%, 1 millionth, of their natural habitat range. One study found that captive male orcas spend nearly 70% of their time virtually motionless. Captive marine mammals suffer from a huge range of health problems, including extreme stress, neurotic behaviors, and at abnormal levels of aggression. Annual mortality rates for captive orcas have improved over the years, but they still don't match the health of the populations in the wild. Dr. Naomi Rose, the report's lead author at AWI's Marine Mammal Science, says, marine mammals simply cannot thrive in captivity. Almost all marine mammals species are wide-range predators, and the best we can provide for them are barren concrete boxes or small sea pen corrals. There are some pros to captivity: educational and research purposes, conservation and species preservation, and economic benefits and tourism. However, I raise the argument that the cons outweigh the pros, with ethical and welfare concerns, reduced genetic diversity, and distorted illusions of conservation. An up-and-coming solution to keeping marine mammals in captivity is by creating seaside sanctuaries, assisting in international marine mammal rescues, and advancing whale and dolphin science. Port Hilford Bay in Nova Scotia is where whales and dolphins can live in an environment that maximizes well-being and autonomy and is close as possible to their natural habitat. The creation of the sanctuary is the first step towards the vision of a world in which all whales and dolphins can be treated with respect and no longer confined in concrete tanks in entertainment parks or aquariums. Look at the numbers. 1,100 square yards of space is in a large display tank that is typically high-end for a marine park. 484,000 minimum square yards are in a seaside sanctuary. There are already sanctuaries for many land animals that are being retired from zoos and circuses. It's now time for marine mammals to get the same thing. Other ways we can help protect marine mammals is to change and modify the laws so that there is complete protection of these animals, regardless of whether they're in the wild or not. Use your voice and speak for what you want to see happen in the world. And also, spreading awareness can help with these situations. The documentary Blackfish has started a worldwide phenomenon called the Blackfish effect, changing the culture that surrounds SeaWorld. In order to do this, we need to destroy the stigma and the culture that surrounds performing marine mammals to give them the help that they need. The circus had the 19th century, SeaWorld had the 20th. Let's make sure it never happens again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Works Cited is down in the description, and this is Ava Cronenberg, your captain, logging off.